Hey, I want to talk to you briefly about your op-eds. I've taken a look at all of the op-eds and I've provided comments, and I've also provided comments for your WJs. And so I've tried to create this synthesis of ideas, and I want to kind of run through them and hopefully clarify some of these points. Now, I know that the op-ed can be a little bit challenging because I'm giving you a real world situation, and in a sense that's different than an academic essay, right? An academic essay is kind of written to no one, or really it's written to a teacher, and so we don't really have to take into account some of those rhetorical moves. At the same time, you're not just allowed to rant. Right? So we need to find that careful balance. So I want to address these points, and I hope that that helps as you begin to revise your assignment. And to begin, I want to talk about the distinction between the argument and the rant. And really what I'm looking for in this assignment is I am looking for an argument. And now when I say argument here, you can think that it is a series of claims. And for many of you, the initial claim that you make is a claim about the cultural narrative that you're addressing. You're basically showing that this narrative exists. And it doesn't matter if that narrative has to do with monogamy or has to do with gender roles. You're basically demonstrating that there's a narrative out there that exists, and you're then taking a position on it. And when you take a position on it, you're providing 2 to 3 claims that are your own, that give your stance or your opinion about that narrative. And now for a lot of you, what I've asked you to do is to go back in to your draft and to think about where those claims are. Where's the claim about the narrative, and then where are the claims that connect to your position? And I think a good way of thinking is to highlight them. And if you can't highlight them, then you may want to think, okay, I have to now create these, and I've got to put these into the paper such that all of the material in my paper serves as support for these various claims. And that gets us to the organization and to how you use these stories and anecdotes. If you think about the organization of your paper, you can very much think about the organization that you might find in an essay. And what I mean by that is that in an essay, you do have these paragraphs that are really providing support for a main idea or a main point. And so it's the same thing here with the op-ed. Right? I'm looking that you have a claim that's being supported by each of the paragraphs that you're providing, or perhaps 2 paragraphs provide support for a single claim. But you really want to think about the claims and the support. Now, with regard to the type of support, I imagine that many of you are going to use a little bit of outside research, and you're going to use those personal examples or those observations or evidence that comes from others. All of these sorts of support are perfectly permissible in the op-ed. But be careful, because you're not just sharing a story in order to tell a story. These stories have to serve the claims that you have. And so for some of you, when I'm reading the op-ed, it's as if I'm reading this narrative, but I'm not sure what the argument is that the narrative is supporting. And so for all of you, remember that the piece that you're writing is a persuasive piece. It's a persuasive piece that has a variety of claims, and you want to make sure that each section of the op-ed is supporting a given claim. Now, also, when you think about the support that you're bringing in, I want you to think that the support speaks to those rhetorical appeals. So sometimes you may have outside research that's brought in because it helps create this logical argument. At other times, you may be sharing personal experience because that helps build a relationship with the audience, right? There's a pathos-based appeal that's being brought in there. And so take all of that into consideration as you revise. Now, point number 2. There were some questions that people asked, and then I also just saw it in some of the writing that had to do with citing and formatting and all of that good stuff. So let me say a couple of things. Number 1, I'm not asking this to be MLA formatted. In other words, there should be no in-text citations, whether MLA or APA or any other sort of documentation that we find in academics. Really, in the place of those in-text citations, I'm just looking to see that everybody is fair to the research you bring in and that you attribute the ideas. And so I give you this little example here where it says, according to a 2017 research study published in the Journal of Psychology. That's the sort of move you can make when you bring in your research. You don't need to have an in-text citation or any of that stuff. You just want to be clear and give credit to where the information came from. Now, at the end of your document, should you wish, you can give me a formatted works cited, or you could, if you prefer, just give me the hyperlinks to the research that you've provided. I shouldn't see any of this stuff in the op-ed itself. And if you think about it, if you read a magazine or a newspaper, you don't really see that any of these are MLA formatted. So hopefully that clarifies how we do the citations and the attributions. And now, final point, and this is a big point for this assignment, and it gets back to the point that I had made originally. And that is, I want everybody to take audience into consideration. I have given everybody the same audience, right? The MiraCosta audience. That includes the students, the faculty, the staff, perhaps the community. But I want you to have a real audience in mind, because that audience should dictate a lot of the choices you make. It's going to dictate the tone you use. It could perhaps dictate the sorts of examples that are going to work. It could dictate whether you're writing in first person, second person, third person. It's going to dictate levels of formality. All of these sorts of things need to be taken into consideration, and all of them are directly connected to audience. Now that's a big difference when we contrast that to just a generic academic essay. Again, an academic essay doesn't have an audience really, right? But this has a real audience. So will that example speak to the audience? Is that tone going to work for the audience? You want to be really careful with these sorts of things. And then also, with regard to the actual claims that you're making, you want to think about the audience. So for example, you may not want to introduce a claim near the beginning that's going to offend a lot of your audience because it could turn them off. Or if you do have a claim that could potentially offend, you may want to provide a rebuttal or a concession or something so that you do not put the audience on the defensive. So there you have it. Hopefully some of these points register, and hopefully they help as you go in and revise your paper. Take a look at all the comments I've put on, and I look forward to those final drafts on Thursday. Take care.